David, it's 2025. CES is ongoing. The autonomy markets seem to be really heating up with Jensen Huang's keynote last night, all about the multi trillion-dollar opportunity in autonomous vehicles. Where do you see the market for autonomy heading this year?
Well, look, then they announced this thing with Aurora and Continental to make autonomous trucks at scale. Sent Aurora shares up 40%. So, look, I think you and I have talked about this the last couple of podcasts that, we're the biggest opportunity and most interest from investors, certainly right now, seems to be in trucking. But, Waymo's pushing hard to, really deploy and get things moving as well. So on the Robotaxi side, and I think you're starting to see some movement on, with autonomy. I still think it's a very hard challenge, whether it's trucking or Robotaxi, to make work without problems. And the public has like zero tolerance for any sort of accident with an autonomous vehicle, regardless of how bad humans are at driving. The public has zero tolerance for it. So that's going to make it that's just an ever-present challenge. But we're starting to see real deployment from a variety of players, and I think this is going to be maybe a launch pad year for autonomy in a way where and you're seeing stuff in main mobility in Japan. So you're just seeing more stuff actually hit the road with potentially revenue-bearing business in autonomous drive.
Does revenue become the defining factor, or does the location? I asked that because Kodiak went driver out with Atlas Energy last year in West Texas. This year, they're going to scale up, and it's revenue generating. Their on-road business will be coming on at a later date. Will investors be following revenue, or what are they going to be looking for these deployments?
The short answer is yes, but it doesn't have to be huge revenue. I think but revenue is sort of a, we've crossed the Rubicon kind of thing where we're out there with the public, driving on public roads, and someone's paying for it, and there aren't a lot of deaths. So that is sort of a trip hammer. But I think when GM decided to basically collapse Cruise as a robotaxi company, they were running right up against a return to public roads and ferrying the public and charging revenue. They were getting back to doing that in Texas, and I think they kind of lost their nerve and the desire to fund it, because that is a crossing point for anybody. So once you do that, you're kind of making a statement that we've got this challenge, even if in limited ways, beat here. And so that, I think investors look at it as, okay, these guys are actually starting a business. It's not just an R&D project anymore.
If the momentum holds from this first week of January, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, let's even say we're in June, July, we're in the events of the summer, does GM look back and think that they made a mistake because they could have raised outsized capital? And if this momentum continues and the capitals start to flow, and with the IPO market, what Bloomberg has done a fantastic job covering, really truly opens up, do they pull the plug too early?
If you talk to GM, they say they haven't given up on autonomy, but working internally on autonomous features for your vehicle is very different than the public pressure of a separate company trying to start a robotaxi service. When I wrote a column about this the day after they ended Cruise as a robotaxi and independent company, I said, they may one day look at this the same way they look at the EV1, which they pulled off the roads the same year Tesla was founded. Elon Musk wasn't yet involved, but Martin Eberhard was founding the company. And, and the rest is history. It took Tesla a long time, but so what? I think GM could look back at this and regret one day. Is it going to be this summer with IPO markets? I don't know, because we have to see how those IPOs do. Is it just a Waymo IPO that investors want, or do they want all kinds of IPOs from autonomous vehicle companies? That, Waymo is they are in a class by themselves at this point. And I think given what happened with Cruise and the huge retrenchment that they took, even if Cruise was still in existence, Waymo would be in a class by itself. So, from that, if you look at it that way, I think it would have been longer. Cruise needed more time and more proof points to get an IPO. I don't think they would have been able to take this thing public in the next 12 months. But if they did pretty well in Texas, if they started bringing revenue in, if they had a lot of incident-free driving with the public and the service was working well, could they have IPO'd this for a lot of money in a couple of years? Yeah, they probably could have. To me, they talked about not wanting to spend capital on this, and that, this is a capital allocation move. And, that's part of it because it's not cheap. I think it was a risk aversion move. where they just didn't want to, because the timing was just too close to when they were going to launch, relaunch services in Texas. I think they just got cold feet and said, nope, we're not doing it. But there are other factors at play that do relate to capital allocation, do relate to where they want to spend their money. And they're launching a lot of EVs right now at a time when, they're getting tougher to sell and the Trump administration may pull back on incentives. And if GM needs more money to keep that program going, do they want to spend $1.5 billion a year on Cruise when they might have to spend some money on incentives to keep keep the EV scale up going? I think all of these things are considerations, right? Like you can't view any decision in a vacuum. But yeah, to answer your question, they could look back at this in a couple of years and say, yeah, if we had just stuck it out, we could have done, we could have had a big IPO on this thing and it would have been a real business.
Does Dan Ammann look back on this and said, I was right, we should have spun it out?
Good question. I mean, he might. And the people in the company who worked at Cruise who were fans of Dan would say that. But to me, that's a pretty... To get there, I got to kind of close one eye and cover one ear. Because remember what happened to tech stocks and tech IPOs so Dan was sent out of the company December 21, whatever year it was. We could look it up if we wanted to. The first quarter of the following year started an absolute rout in tech stocks. And, Ammann's been gone a few years now, and Cruise has had problems with the technology, with regulators. Think about the beating, and they took enough of a public beating just reputationally. Think about the difficulty of managing a public company when you have SEC or not SEC. You would have SEC investigations that would coincide with the Justice Department and the NHTSA investigation that they already had. So that like managing a public company through something like that is pretty torturous. So just right out of the gate, that IPO, the stock itself would have been in peril. And because look, this thing was never worth $30 billion like the private investment rounds suggested. It just wasn't. I mean, maybe from the hype at the time, but investors never bought that because they never gave GM the kind of valuation for having Cruise inside of it. A few times, Paul Jacobson, the CFO of GM, said, if you buy GM now, you get GM cheap and Cruise for free. Autonomous stocks are still trading at a low point. And it's going to take a while and a lot of proof for them to get back to bigger multiples.
It's going to take a lot of proof. The market uses kind of, for better or for worse, Tesla as the barometer for where autonomy is going. And this is all due respect to Tesla investors. It trades like a meme stock. Some of those movements are just outsized movements, and you can look at the volume in the terminal. But staying on Dan, if Dan was CEO and he had his way and he spun it out, you reported on this, the headquarters would have been in Miami. So that incident potentially in San Francisco could have never happened. And you've always could have sold additional shares and raised money. Aurora's done it. They've raised capital from being public. It could have worked. It potentially could have worked because Aurora's been able to survive. And now look at their stock today. It's thriving. The revenue's not there, but the hype and momentum is there, and the stock is on its way up.
I'm not sure the incident in San Francisco never would have happened because I think if Ammann had moved the company to Miami, they still would have been running the service in San Francisco because that's where the engineers are. I don't think they would have moved the engineering and development team away, which means they would have kept the bulk of the cars there for a while. Now, maybe the incident wouldn't have happened because I do think Ammann would have had a more conservative approach to deploying the cars than Kyle Vogt did. I mean, this is all huge speculation, but when all that stuff went down, there were T-shirts that said Dan was right, and I think it's because Ammann had a pretty cautious view toward deploying, and Cruise was getting very aggressive, kind of move fast and break things, sort of thing, and it hurt them. That may not have happened under Dan, so it could have been different, but they would have been proving out the value of the company at a slower rate. And you're talking 3+ years on now, and they'd have relatively minor deployments, and they'd probably be trading at a pretty low place too.
I fully agree with that. You look at another company inside of a large corporation, Zoox. Does Amazon, do you think, ever spin that out for an IPO? If one, they get the deployment going, and then if two, the investor excitement over autonomy continues?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, look, it's so opaque, Amazon and Zoox. I mean, look, Amazon doesn't need the money with a Zoox IPO. Do they spin it out just to kind of keep managing their core business more simply and still get the benefit of autonomous trucks from it? They could certainly do that. I think there are ways for companies to partially spin things out and keep a strong relationship. Even if you're a large minority player, it helps you keep a bridge between the two companies so that Amazon would still be able to use the autonomous technology for its trucks with sort of a most favored partner status. They wouldn't need the money, but if they wanted to monetize it, bring in some other investors, particularly strategic investors who could help them, building vans and in other ways. Yeah, sure. There are a lot of permutations here. If Zoox is going to work on like last mile, middle mile sort of stuff. I think they're still focused on Robotaxi though, and that's what they want to deploy in Vegas, and maybe that becomes a service for its customers. In which case, it's a little less strategic, and maybe they spin it out. But look, it's opaque. I guess everybody in autonomy, it's one of their favorite parlor games, but it's one that you can't declare a winner on for a long time.
I've heard from several friends that have visited Zoox's depot in Las Vegas this week. They said they believe the depot can hold about 400 vehicles. Not saying there's 400 vehicles there. They based on what they could see from a size perspective. If that indeed is true and Amazon ramps up Vegas to hundreds of vehicles for Zoox, when does Amazon take the next step and integrate it into Prime? We saw it over time. They integrated Whole Foods into Prime. When do we see Amazon take that next step if they do not spin out Zoox and integrate it into a Prime tier?
Look, whenever they think it works flawlessly, right? Like you can't put your Prime customers in those cars and then have problems. And look, Waymo's clearly the best at this here, but they have problems too, and they're not running people over, but they've got some glitches. Look, their vehicles do work very well from every report on them I've read. I haven't been in one recently, but Zoox would have to have like just really, really good execution and ride service before they're going to put it on the Prime platform.
They're going to get there, but Waymo's there today. Besides the one recent incident that went viral, the merry-go-round, where the gentleman was trying to get to the airport and the vehicle kept going in a merry-go-round. We know that Waymo is by far the technical leader, the deployment leader. Where do you see them heading in 25? We know publicly they're going to Japan with service potentially starting in 26, 27. Do you see more U.S. markets coming online? Atlanta should come online this year. Austin, I will say, definitely come online. Do you see more U.S. cities following that, or perhaps another international expansion?
Yeah, they've kind of... international is tough to say. I don't know if they're doing mapping work and some of the spade work in for European cities or anything like that. But I think they will just kind of keep steadily adding markets and adding more vehicles in the markets where they're already starting to deploy or already offering service. They'll just keep growing this thing, and they're doing it at a measured pace. Especially now with Cruise out of the picture, and Tesla's Robotaxi plans kind of TBD. The pressure is off of them to go and conquer this city and be the first brand there. Now, that was a big fear that Cruise had, is if they let Waymo get to all these cities, that they would be Lyft to Waymo's Uber. And that's one of the reasons they were racing to get into some of these cities. I'm not sure people see it that way, but customers, that is. But in any case, there's other than Zoox in Vegas and some stuff from Mobility, which is a different kind of service, really. There's really no competition out there for them in the U.S. So they can get into cities just to kind of get them mapped out, start to build a foundation without pressure of the public markets looking at them, and without having to worry about competitors. But I think you'll see more. I think they'll steadily work that way.
Does Waymo become a verb, similar to the way that Uber is a verb, Google's a verb? Does it become a verb at the way that they continue to expand?
I've always kind of thought that's why they picked that name. It could, right? I mean, first brands that get a dominant position, I'm going to Xerox this, I'm going to Uber my way there. Yeah, they can become the name that's Saran Wrap, right? Saran Wrap it. These are consumer names that got there first, established a dominant position, and they were the ones to do it. So yeah, they could.
If they do that, we saw last year in the markets, you've covered this, your colleagues at Bloomberg have covered this, the investor overhang against Uber, the Robotaxi fears. Does Uber need a fragmented market where more players have to enter the marketplace for them to prosper with Robotaxis? If Waymo just continues to do what Waymo's doing and slowly and steadily gaining market share?
I mean, it's like, does Uber have to find somebody quickly and pair up? I'm not sure they can. Who's there who could really get you where you need to be? I mean, maybe Zoox, but we don't, but we'll see once they deploy. But where do you go to get the rival to Waymo's technology and quickly compete with them in another market.
Do they partner with a fleet operator and kind of operate as a REIT and then put the Nuro tech on there, the Wave tech on there, potentially operate this Uber fleet powered by one of their technology partners?
Oh, yeah, I think they could. When is another question because we don't really know where any of these guys are. And then, look, there's the other thing that I wrote about in late November, the federal government standards on this thing. That kind of takes all of this stuff we're talking about. And, until Trump gets in office and that's established, I would think even if the companies are very bullish on what they think the Trump administration is going to do with robotaxis, they still have to wait and see what that is before they can really start working. There's still no construct in which they can work until they know what those details are. But that's a big deal. Whatever it's going to be, it's going to be a very big deal because even if it's kind of restrictive, at least it tells the companies what they have to do. And from that perspective, it's easier than nothing. It's easier than just deploying robotaxis and waiting for NHTSA to investigate you over some incident because there's really no standard out there.
This is going to sound silly, but this morning at 11 a.m., President-elect Trump in Mar-a-Lago made a speech where he wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Don Jr.'s in Greenland today, as we know that Bloomberg's reported on it, that Trump would like to buy Greenland. What if the industry renamed it America Taxis? I know it's kind of silly, but would that potentially accelerate?
We named what America Taxis?
Change the name Robotaxis to America Taxis. Would that accelerate Trump's desire to do a national framework based on all of his public moves that he has made?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Trump says a lot of things that don't end up happening. During the Bush administration, because France wouldn't support us in the Iraq invasion, people were calling them freedom fries, and that stuck for 3 weeks. I don't know. It seems kind of silly to me. And also, it doesn't denote what people think of with a robotaxi. Like a robotaxi is a robot-driven taxi. I've always looked at it as people should maybe raise their metaphor a bit and call it a robo chauffeur. but it's not as easy to say. But no, I think robotaxis kind of become almost part of the vernacular now, and unless it's replaced by I'm on a Waymo there, I think that's the name. No matter what Trump does. I mean, look, Trump's got a lot of social influence, obviously, but not that way. I think half the country would call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico, no matter what Trump called it.
That's true. That's a valid point. This is hypothetical. If we do, and when we do get a national framework, do you see Waymo potentially moving into New York City? I ask that because the outrage of the last 48 hours was congestion pricing.
Autonomy right now in New York City is tough. And I don't know if they've changed the rules, but you remember when Cruise was going to go there, and the rules in New York, in Manhattan, I think, or maybe in the whole city, were that if you're going to run taxis in New York, you had to have a state trooper trailing the car, or maybe it was a city cop. I don't know. But you had to have law enforcement trailing the car, and you had to pay the officers overtime. And everyone said, forget it. So unless you get a much more permissive construct for companies to do that, look, that's even tougher than San Francisco. And San Francisco's a pretty tough regulatory environment to run a robotaxi, and both cities are really tough for your best human drivers, let alone a robotic system.
Brad Sturz from Audi worked on trying to change that law, and you had to follow a plan, had to have a trooper in front of you, trooper in back of you, and you had to have one hand on the wheel. That's New York State law. And so federal framework comes, you have preemption, it overrides that. I don't see any which way until that happens.
That's a big question, though. You sure it overrides that? I mean, look, there are a lot of look. Take marijuana legislation, right? Marijuana is legal in New York, Michigan, Colorado, a bunch of other states. My family lives in New York. I live in Michigan, so I know it's legal there. And I remember when Colorado legalized it. And I know it's legal in other places because when I travel, I can smell it all over the place. Whatever. I mean, last time I was in New York, it was an unseasonably warm fall day. This is a couple months ago. And I was downtown, and the taxi driver would not run the air, so I rolled the window down. And from 18th Street up to Bloomberg headquarters at 59th on Lexington Avenue, I smelled pot the whole way, and I was in a car. Anyway, look, pot's still illegal federally. So you can't bring it to the airport or federal property. And I assume you would, if you got caught with it by a federal agent, you'd still, even in a legal state, you'd have some problems. But people are outdoors, clearly smoking pot in Manhattan and downtown Detroit and wherever else it's legal. So I don't know what that means for federal framework on robotaxis and state laws. Clearly, if there is a federal framework on robotaxis, then states where there's nothing, it's just federal law takes hold. I think federal law would certainly be relevant and valid, but if state laws are more permissive than the federal law for robotaxis, what does that mean for how you operate them? We'd need like a transportation policy attorney to tell us how that works. And hopefully one is listening to this podcast and will write in and give us a legal opinion that we don't have to pay for.
Yes, we have quite a few attorneys that listen to this, so please send it. I will post your unedited comments below this on the comments. When we do get a federal framework, does this give investors the certainty they need to truly invest in the space? And I'm talking PE, pension funds, sovereign wealth, the real money, not this venture money, the real money.
Do they start pouring in? Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, Cruise I think they had launched a pilot in Qatar, I think, or the Emirates. I'm pretty sure it was Qatar. And look, the sovereign wealth fund's clearly interested in the future of transportation. They helped start Rivian. They've got a lot of money in Lucid. In fact, they're the majority owner of Lucid, or they own roughly half of it. And yeah, I think they would absolutely get involved with autonomy. They do. They like transportation. So much of their wealth in oil depends on what happens with transportation. And I think they're going to, if they're not already invested in some of the startups, which I'd be surprised if they weren't, then yeah, as it starts to look better, they're not afraid. They've got enough money where they can pay a higher price to invest in something like autonomy, even if they wait till they see stronger proof points and the price to get in is higher. Now, they could also invest early because they have enough money where they can take the risk as well. But they can put money in whenever they want. And I think they given their, what they've done with electric vehicles, it's sort of a natural extension of that.
I can tell you, I've been invited to Abu Dhabi by the Sovereign Wealth Fund to talk about autonomy. So the interest I could say from Abu Dhabi is very real. Another proof point is WeRide has a deployment there with Uber. So when the sovereigns come to autonomy, you and I both agree they're going to invest in the sector. Is this going back to the old Chase Coleman days, is this a spray and pray approach, or is this we're going to pick the horse, we're going to back it, and we're going to back it to the tilt?
If we use their presence in electric vehicles as an example, I think the reason they invested in Rivian was RJ Scaringe, the CEO, went to school with somebody in the I think the Saudi royal family or something like that at MIT. So it was more of a family and friend connection. So, but with Lucid, they just picked the company, put a lot of money into it, helped them set up, lay the groundwork for manufacturing on the Arabian Peninsula. And so, if that's an indicator, then they'll pick somebody they think is the way to go. I mean, look, they could participate in the Waymo IPO in a big way whenever that happens if they wanted to, or they could buy into any of the startups. But for Robotaxi, there's just not much left, right? I mean, the Japanese have kind of taken a big position in May Mobility, and with NTT and Toyota, and May is going to deploy over there at some point. So, I mean, I'm sure they could invest if they wanted to and get May set up services in Saudi Arabia or, any of the others too. So, I think they'll pick a horse and go with it. And then, look, there's been such a shakeout that there aren't that many horses left anyhow.
May Mobility is fascinating. Edwin told me this, Olson. Toyota's not the largest shareholder anymore. It's NTT, which is really interesting. And there is a very large focus from what Ed told me on Japan. Toyota announced with NVIDIA yesterday that they're going to work to develop an autonomous vehicle. Where does May Mobility play in this as Toyota's really ramping up their AV efforts now?
Look, it's interesting because I think Toyota can end up being just end up doing the manufacturing because, May Mobility does things differently. They're not a typical robotaxi play. They don't take cars that you and I would buy or that a taxi fleet would buy and ferry around a couple of people. These are smallish shuttles, right? And they're basically they fill in areas in cities where the route is needed, but it doesn't have enough people needing it for a public city bus to pay for the capital cost and then the labor of a public city bus to run that up and down that route all day long. So, which is a need, right? Particularly for like handicapped people and so forth. And it's something you need in Japan with the kind of congestion they have there and how compact the cities are. So, it's not like Toyota. I mean, maybe at some point, and I think May Mobility will do this, they'll develop a pure robotaxi system and a piggybacking off the work they've already done. And then maybe that's where Toyota gets a self-driving system. But, at the moment, these are shuttles, and, Toyota can build those, but it builds everything. So, and I think that's it's a way for Toyota to stay in the game with a company that, is actually doing something out there, and pretty low risk, by the way, because it's not trying to solve the problem of navigating every single street corner in some big city. It, kind of coasts a few blocks, and then it gets to a stop, and that single corner stop, it knows very well, and then it cruises again. So it needs less data. And it's, predictable, same route all the time within a small area of a city. It's lower risk, way to stay in the game. And, as the AI gets better, then, maybe it takes the next step to commuter cars. And it could. I mean, they've done, May Mobility has been around way longer than any of us thought, given the number of companies that went bankrupt. And it's to their credit. They also had a business model that was a lot simpler, and the technology is simpler. So Toyota can probably be the one who manufactures it. They can be a passive investor. And if it gets better, they can take it to another level if they want to.
It's the little engine that could. That's what I've called May for a long time. We have the public partnership with Lyft coming on live. I was talking to the gentleman who's building it out for them. I said, how big are you building this Atlanta ODD? He said, I can't tell you specifics. I can tell you it's the largest ODD I've ever worked on. This gentleman's worked on large Robotaxi deployments. If Atlanta, with the May Mobility Lyft, is as big as I'm potentially hearing it is, and this operates a true Robotaxi, and these are Toyota vehicles, does that become a defining moment for Toyota to, one, either potentially increase their stake in May or take May more into Japan with a further expansion, or partner with Lyft here in the States to take it to another city, and perhaps that's Toyota's scaling strategy for autonomy?
It could be. I mean, the conversations I've had with Toyota, it's like Toyota is like they're the ultimate fast follower, right? I mean, their executives still are not very bullish on electric vehicles. If you ask them about their electric vehicles, they sell in decent numbers, the BZ4X and the Lexus version of that. But if you talk to they could have a knockout quarter in sales of their EVs. And if you ask their executives about electric vehicles, they'll start talking about their hybrid program. And they just reflexively do that, right? So they're not totally sold on EVs. And I think they're probably less sold on AVs. And what Toyota does is they have a lot of battery research going on in Japan. They have some EVs, and they just kind of aggressively develop without feeling the need to deploy something that's not going to get them a lot of customers and a lot of money. And then as soon as it becomes a thing, they hop into the market and they take advantage of the work everybody else has already done. And they're great at executing, so they can do it without, terrible snafus. And so I think that's what they would do here. I don't see them with May kind of sticking their neck out there with a Robotaxi service, using Lyft or anything like that until it's really obviously ready. And that's not really what May does at the moment, right? Right now it's, predictable routes on small shuttles.
May is maturing.
They are.
Well, I'll see you when I'm in Detroit. I'm coming up in March. Edwin's hosting me. Driver out in the snow.
In the snow.
So we're trying to plan around snow, driver out. That if that goes the way in the snow, driver out in Ann Arbor. If that holds, that's interesting because that opens up northern Japan.
Sure. You mean you're talking shuttles to the ski resorts?
You're a very wise gentleman, sir. You're a very wise gentleman. With some great Japanese whiskey on board, hopefully. Edwin, you got to put the experience in there with a Japanese whiskey. You have two gentlemen here that want to join.
I mean, look, a mini bar for skiers after they've been on the slopes all day. Warm up with some hibiki, sure.
And so if that's the case, because they're maturing. The Robotaxi market's pretty much set. We agree. It's Waymo's the de facto leader. You have the question mark. Where's Tesla going to play in this? Cybercab, it's not getting on the roads this year. I could see it going from Gigafactory to the Austin Bergen Airport.
But the target was 2026, right, on Cybercab?
Yeah, but I could see small testing this year over there. 26, I'm unsure. 27, maybe. FSD 13 is going at a rapid pace. But they're the outlier. Sundar Pichai at the DealBook conference said he views Tesla as Waymo's biggest competitor. Do you feel that Mr. Sundar Pichai of Alphabet is correct in that?
So, I mean, is Tesla Waymo's biggest competitor? Probably, because no one else is really doing it, no one else even wants to do Robotaxi at scale right now. And so you look at the assets Tesla has. I mean, look, they do have smart people there, obviously, and they have the ability to hire talent, and they're working on this. And a lot of people have lost a lot of money shorting Tesla and betting against Elon. The other thing, though, with Tesla, with any plan, whether it was a new vehicle or anything else, they're frequently late. And it's not because, I always thought this was misunderstood. It's not because the company's not competent. What I think happens, and you and I talked about this when they had the robots at their event, where there was some human assistance. It's a story Ed Ludlow and I broke. They had some human assistance behind the scenes. You get the sense with Tesla, what happens is Elon orders something up, and he wants the flight to Mars equivalent of robots or robotaxis as soon as possible. And his people know he wants it as soon as possible when they start working on it. And then if they almost inevitably run up close to his deadline and it's just not done or it's not possible, then they have to have the uncomfortable conversation. And I get the sense that's where we are with Tesla's robotaxis, where he announces this in late 2024, says they're going to do it in 2026, and that's sort of the stretch goal for the company. And if it's not a public stretch goal, then nobody believes it. But that's not to say Tesla can't do it, but they haven't run these cars on public roads among the madcap driving that is human beings. And, Cruise, for all of its faults, had been working on this for a decade and had pretty good technology. And Waymo has been working on it for 15 years at least with very good technology. And both still have snafus. Tesla hasn't gone through that period. And they're going to try to, basically do a crash course, figuratively, not literally, on this thing to get there. It's going to be hard. There's a lot of miles of public road testing and then a lot of simulation done by Waymo based off of that learning. Tesla does it, they're not flat-footed here. They have a lot of learning from autopilot, now from FSD, but it's still not the same. These are not fully autonomous systems running on the road with the public. So it's, this is a big stretch goal again, I think, from Tesla. But Tesla's obviously serious about this. They can raise tremendous amounts of money to spend on it. They have smart people developing it. And Elon has staked the valuation of his company on it. Because look, you don't get to the valuation Tesla has in the business of manufacturing and selling cars. And Tesla's growth rates in EV sales, actually, they sold fewer vehicles in 2024 than they did in 2023. So it's not a growth story selling cars, and which is why the valuation was always huge. The investors saw sky's the limit for cars. The valuation is now not only it's on the technologies they can develop around AI and autonomy and products around that, and then his relationship with Trump to clear the regulatory path to do it. That's why it's worth so much right now. So he's got to get it done. And he probably will. When? No idea. I would use 2026 as a baseline, but we'll see. It's just, it's just such a hard challenge.
I agree with you. Tesla's going to crack full self-driving. They are going to get a fully autonomous vehicle at some point. Not going to put a date on it. I truly believe, having every day I drive FSD 13.2, and it is get leaps and bounds over 12.6. It's getting there. There's edge cases. It's not fully autonomous, but is it darn good? Yes. Is it the best level 2 plus system I've ever used in my life? Yes. Is it an L4 system? No. Is it on its way to being an L4 system? Yes. When it gets there, true L4, I don't know. And I do not believe it's going to be this year, and I don't believe it's going to be next year, but it's going to get there. When they crack full self-driving with vision only, does that start a reset where, if you look at the Waymo stack is very heavy, the Zoox stack is very heavy, where companies start to rethink their stack?
Look, that's a big debate right now. Whereas Tesla, and I've talked to some startups who agree with Elon that it's got to be a vision camera-based system that's purely AI-driven and basically drives like a human does. You see something that you've never seen before, it's not map-based, and you react to it, period. Others disagree with them. If you talk to Waymo, they will tell you that they have sort of a hybrid of that, where they have AI that is doing a lot of the same thing, even though they've got kind of map-based. The map is telling the cars where to stop and do a lot of things, but it's still reacting to what the vehicle sees. And I can see, look, cameras are cheaper than LiDAR. That's one of the other reasons. So I don't know that this has to be either or. I can envision a situation where, because of weather or fog, some other condition, Tesla has to add a couple of LiDAR, but not the full stack suite that other companies have. I can see where Waymo and others who are using a LiDAR-based system can reduce the number of sensors they're using, because they're adding a camera, and that you just sort of like, I don't see why it has to be mutually exclusive. You can, in this, look, we get to the outer limits of my knowledge of how the technology would interact, but really, if I'm trying to build an autonomous vehicle, I just get the best suite of sensors, LiDAR cameras that sees the road, makes the best decisions for as little as I can possibly spend so that you can make money off of these things eventually. And that's what they're all going to try to do. So I kind of see both sides of this argument and maybe coming to a middle point.
Does AI become the great accelerator here? Because Jensen last night in his keynote said the automotive business is projected to grow $6 billion in fiscal year 2026. And following that, he said that autonomous vehicles will be the first multi-trillion-dollar robotics industry. That's a direct quote.
Look, it has to be, because I think a lot of the systems that we have out there for level 2 and level 3, I don't know that they can really just kind of keep getting better and then go level 4 full self. Well, the term full self-driving has forever been destroyed by Tesla, because FSD really isn't full self-driving. You use it, right? And it's not a level 4 system.
No, it's not a level 4 system.
So full autonomy. Let's agree that that's our term for this podcast. I'm not sure that those systems. Tesla's a little bit different, but the others that you drive from all the other car companies, I don't know that they can just keep getting better and then suddenly become full autonomy. I think it's a different science and different sets of code and different stack and everything else. So I think you're going to need AI to really make this work. And look, what's happened at Cruise and what's happened with all these other companies that eventually went away is the cautionary tale here that we need. All this stuff takes more time than everybody thinks and than investors want. And, I've used AI systems for language, just played around with them, and the results are not great. So, and that's much more simple than navigating human beings through traffic. So that is the enabler. How quick, that's what you and I are going to have to keep covering for a while.
Will the traditional OEMs, especially the ones that you cover in Detroit, will they begin to invest in AI? And then I asked that on the backside, what is their autonomy strategy? Because right now, that doesn't seem like they really have a clearly defined strategy.
No, I think their strategy is, the strategy's been to walk away. Ford and Volkswagen did. GM says they haven't. And then I think they are going to keep working on a system that is, that they could one day sell in Cadillacs and other vehicles. But geez, they backed away in part because of the risk, I think, and they didn't want to spend a lot of money developing it. It's not part of their capital allocation plan. So are they going to continue and really develop this quickly before somebody else who is like Wayve or, even Waymo could license a system to them? That remains to be seen. But I think for all the companies, not just GM, they're not developing anything. So the strategy probably is, okay, once this becomes more mature technology, they'll just license it, because the companies developing AI and AV technologies, they don't want to bend metal and manufacture anything. You get lousy margins doing that. Basically, these companies partner up. They do what they're good at and what they enjoy doing and what they make the most money doing, and find somebody else to do the rest of it.
Does this validate Wave's business model then of licensing, where they've said that strictly from day one?
Absolutely. Because, is there a car company still working on a true AV system? Not really.
BYD, but that's a Chinese automotive.
BYD, yeah, the Chinese, that's a different animal. So Korean, Japanese, German, American French car companies, nah, not really. Not in a way that's like, pedal to the metal anymore.
Their strategy has been to walk away. In my opinion, the strategy should have been to build and invest, but now they're going to wait and license, and that could open up a whole new crop of winners. Perhaps that winner is Wave. Perhaps that winner is Nuro. We don't know, but we know we're going to have you back all the time, David, because I always enjoy these conversations and I get great listener and viewer feedback on it. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is scaling robotaxis. David, as always, thanks for coming on the road to autonomy.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.